Hello, I welcome you again to another episode of the Islamic Dilemma show. In our previous episode, myself and my distinguished guest here, Bill Warner. Bill, how are you?
Good, good.
We talked about a very sensitive topic relating to the status of women, and basically we showed example from the Quran that women, and specifically married women in particular, are not basically protected or even considered to be equal in status with men. Today, we are going to continue along the same line of discussion, and the hope is to cover additional passages and verses found in the Quran to prove one point. Islam did not improve the status of women, period. Isn't that the truth, Bill?
Well, if it did improve their status with what we see now, I pity them for what they had before. But this is very strange because we know from the Sirah, Khadijah was an independent businesswoman. She proposed marriage to Muhammad. And so when you look at what we have in the status of women that came after Khadijah, it's not clear to me that they improved her status at all.
And Khadijah, of course, is Muhammad's very first wife.
Yes.
She actually proposed marriage to him.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact.
Exactly.
So that's something that goes completely against at least the understanding of the marriage proposal under Islamic teaching and the culture. Last time we finished by our discussion talking about divorce and remarriage, and we mentioned something to the extent that in chapter 2, verse 230 of the Quran, if a woman is to remarry her husband who divorced her 3 times, then there is an unfortunate condition that has to take place, and that's the fact that she must now marry another man, sleep with this man, then that man must divorce her, and then when that happens, she can freely go back now to her previous husband. Now, we want to talk about what happened usually after a husband divorces his wife, whether once, twice, or 3 times, whether he wants to bring her back or at least someone else wants to marry her. There is what is called the prescribed period of waiting, basically. Apparently, the Quran stated that a woman must wait for a period of time. Originally, it was waiting for a whole year to remarry, and then Muhammad basically abrogated that and came up with a period of 40 days or at least 3 months. 3 months basically to wait after divorce before they are allowed to remarry. I have in front of us here on the screen the passage, or one of the many passages in the Quran, but this is a very important passage for some obvious reason that we're going to point out right now. It is found in chapter 65, verse 4. This is what it says. As for you women who have despaired of further menstruating, and we apologize for this kind of language, but we're trying to share at least the teachings of Islam. After basically they have went through their monthly period for a period of 3 months, as we mentioned, then they are allowed to marry. But then Islam gives us the description of who are these women. It gives us certain status of these women, categories if you wish. One of them will be just a woman who just was married and got divorced, and she's waiting to get remarried again. Another status has to do with women maybe who do not have the period anymore. They're past that stage. They still need to wait for 3 months.
Right.
But then I underlined a very troubling passage. It says, and those who have not menstruated as yet. Bill, do you know what it's talking about?
We're talking about children.
We're talking about children,
yes.
Exactly. Young women who have yet to reach the age of puberty.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, this is not unique in terms of its teaching, because the Prophet of Islam have actually did something similar by proposing to a young girl. She was 6 years old.
6 years old.
And married her when she was 9. He was in his 50 at that time. And she is the daughter of his close friend Abu Bakr.
Exactly.
Her name is Aisha. And we
she
did
was
talk
one of
about
his...
Aisha before, that she's one of his favorite wives, basically. So what Islam is teaching us here, that not only women have no respect whatsoever in terms of treating them as human beings, we are talking about what we call child pornography here in civilized countries. Because if you are caught as a male with a woman in many laws under a certain age, let's say 18 or 17 or whatever the age might be under that specific law, you can be in a world of trouble. Yet Islam is stating that you can even marry them if you want to, even if they're as young as 9 or 10 or 11 or 12.
I mean, when we read the verse yet, it just says they haven't reached puberty yet. Theoretically, I suppose it could happen even at a year. I don't know. I mean, there's no lower limit set in this verse. But no matter, even if it's, say, 6 or 9 years old, this to me is appalling.
And what appalling...
And on equality, how could a 6-year-old Aisha be equal to any adult male?
Absolutely. And you know what is so appalling to me is the fact that if this is a standard, then how come we don't see it all the time? I mean, do you know that if a man in his 50s will go right now to any Islamic family and propose to marry their daughter who is 18, not even 9, they're going to laugh at him. I mean, it will be absolutely a laughable proposal because it's culturally just not acceptable. I mean, the age difference is just something that is astonishing sometimes. Does it happen? Of course it happens from time to time, but is it something that happens every day? Is it something that is a standard? No. So that makes you wonder then, if the Prophet did it, then how come everybody else, when it comes to this area, is not willing to follow his footsteps? For obvious reasons, that this is something that is completely weird and awkward.
Well, when you think about it, aside from some sort of what I will think of as strange sexual ideas, what would you want to have a wife for who's not even reached puberty yet? I mean, inequality between a man and a woman. Here you have a man who's 50, a girl who's 9. What do they have to talk about?
Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about a very, very sensitive issue right now, found in chapter 65 of the Quran, verse 4. This particular passage is so troubling that oftentimes commentators on the Quran, classical Muslim commentators, try to soften the blow by at least trying to harmonize its meaning. However, most of them are honest enough to indicate that this verse talks about specific categories of men that have to wait to get remarried, including women who have yet to reach the age of puberty. I mean, as a matter of fact, Bill, we're talking about remarriage, which means that they were married before. And that's even more troubling to me when you think about this.
Another thought I had when we were talking about, I remember there's a hadith, a tradition, that Aisha was allowed to bring her dolls into the harem.
Exactly, exactly. And that the Prophet of Islam would allow her some time to play with her doll, and he would play with her like a father would play with his child. That's his wife.
Yes, yes.
Well, we have on the screen right now some statistics that Bill have developed for us. Bill, would you like to tell us the meaning of this one, which says the statistics of women in the Quran, for instance?
I'm a scientist. Love math, I love statistics, I love facts. And what I have done is that I've gone through the Quran and I've taken out every single verse, which basically means every sentence that in any way relates to women. So we'll have, if you will, and I divided, once you've extracted all of these verses that relate to women, I then put them in 4 piles. Sometimes there's a mention of a woman, and it has nothing to, it's almost in a passing way. It doesn't have anything about her status, all right?
Just women in general.
Just women in general. But then I put it in 3 other piles, where a woman has low status, equal status, and high status.
Give us an example of a low status, for instance.
Well, I think we've just been talking about some things.
So similar to what we covered.
Yeah, that to me is low status. When
what
you're
about
saying
the high status?
That is unique. In almost every case, it's the mother who is exalted as greatest among humanity. Only as a mother is she elevated in status.
And I want to really emphasize the fact that indeed, when you study the status of a woman as a mother in Islam, truly she has a special status. But You have to wait until you get to become a mother in hope that your status will become even better. But you know, culturally, when you look at this bill, I mean, you find this everywhere.
Yes.
Among Hispanic cultures,
Yes.
among
The woman has
European cultures. I mean, Asians, a mother is always, you know, treated this way.
Well, why not? I had a mother. I loved her. She took care of me. This is natural.
So Islam hasn't really brought anything new, basically.
No. I mean, honoring the mother, we should all honor mothers. Then we have equal status. Now,
Define equal, for instance. I mean, are they exactly equal?
Well, on Judgment Day, a man and a woman are judged equally.
So this is a futuristic thing.
Yes, in the future, on Judgment Day, they will be equal. But, as we Americans say, there's a catch-22, or read the fine print, because one of the things she will be judged on in her equality on Judgment Day is how well she obeyed her husband. And we know from a hadith that Muhammad said, I have seen hell, and the majority of its occupants are women. Why, Muhammad? Because they were not grateful to their husbands. So much for equality.
In fact, I want to add to what Bill just mentioned, that Muhammad's complaint about women says that if it wasn't for Eve, that men wouldn't have probably gotten in a lot of trouble that they keep getting in when it comes to lust after women. So he's blaming Eve for something like this, and he's also blaming Eve for the fact that the majority of women are indwelling hell, basically, which, if you read it the other way, what he's saying, men actually, majority of men will be in heaven, majority of women will be in hell. How does that make you feel as a Muslim woman, knowing that your prophet believes that you are the source of evil? In fact, we are going to deal with that topic pretty soon here after the break.
And by the way, that particular hadith, let me add before we break, also he went ahead to say, not only are most of them women in hell, but he also went ahead to say that they're less in intelligence and less in their religion.
Well, Bill, these are a lot of labels that definitely don't make anyone feel comfortable.
They don't make me feel comfortable.
Especially when we're talking about a status of a human being before anything else, that somehow because her gender is different than another gender, all of a sudden now a religion called Islam gives itself the right to try to dictate where she falls on that scale.
Subjugate is the word.
Now, here is my challenge. I know some people will be upset right now and stating that, why am I picking on Islam? Well, we're not picking on Islam, as a matter of fact. I tell you that Islam dictated that we pick on it. If Islam didn't tell me that it is the final religion, if Islam says, you know, I'm just a religion, you know, you're free to do whatever you want, then I would analyze other religions and say, okay, you know, well, Islam is special, it's unique. If you want to follow it, that's your choice. But when you dictate your ideology on me, when you tell me that your Sharia law is the law that must be followed, when you tell me that you are commanded to be supreme over mankind, that your message is universal, that you have improved the status of women, and yet we look at statistics like this. In fact, if you would elaborate, it looks like 71% of the status of women is not that pretty at all.
No, not at all.
So much for equality.
And by the way, let it be said here, this, sometimes when you talk about Islam, someone will say, well, you've taken it out of context. Let us be clear. The context here is the entirety of the Quran.
And this is everything that deals with
everything,
women, basically.
Yes. So the context is the absolute wholeness of it. There's not an escape here.
Well, Bill, hold your thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us so far in this very interesting show about a very sensitive topic that deals with women and their status in Islam. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue our discussions.
Pressure slowly building. An explosion that shocked the world. A coastline forever changed. The oil impossible to remove. Nothing could destroy it until the source was found, until that source was sealed. To uncover the source of Islamic terror, read the Quran Dilemma, Islam Unplugged.
Well, welcome back to the Islamic Dilemma show. My guest, Bill Warner, and myself have been discussing a very disgusting topic, as a matter of fact, and that's the fact that women in Islam are not treated equally at all. In fact, they are treated like objects, that they are demeaned, demoralized, and also they are considered to be a less status than men, and not just a tiny less status. We're talking by far. In fact, we looked at one of your statistical slides, and it shows that 71% of all passages in the Quran prove that women have a lower status.
And we haven't even scratched the surface of this. Everything, there's so much material in the Quran about women.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my hope is that as time progresses, that we will do more episodes that are specialized in maybe one topic at the time when it comes to women. We're moving on to another slide of yours, Bill, and this time you took the hadith and you did the same analysis. Tell us more about this.
Well, I took Bukhari. I don't want to get too technical here, but that is the major, most authoritative collection of Muhammad's hadith.
And before we proceed further, I want to mention to our audience, in case they were not following us in the previous episodes, that hadith is basically the collection of all of the sayings of the Prophet. And some Muslim scholars believe that the sayings of the prophets are also divinely inspired, basically. So, in other words, the Muslim person better really follow them if they want to earn good deeds.
Right.
Okay?
And I did with the hadith exactly what I did with the Quran. I went through the hadith and selected out every single tradition that related to women. And again, I put them into 4 piles. One pile is, yes, a woman is mentioned, but it's just in passing. It doesn't really tell us anything. Then a pile in which the woman is superior, equal, and then in low status. And if anything, in the hadith, it's worse. Because at least in the Quran, only 71% of the verses are about low status. In the hadith, it's 89%. And we have the equal status on Judgment Day, but we've already covered that on Judgment Day she will be judged how she submitted to her husband. And then high status as a woman, 0.6%.
I almost thought it was 0, but well, at least there was something in there.
I give fair credit where fair credit is due. And again, let me emphasize, this is the totality of Bukhari. Don't come in with some one hadith and say, well, see, this hadith is good. I've included it.
Good point. Now, I want to go back to the previous slide. I want to show something very interesting. If we go back to the previous slide, which is the status of women in Quran, you're going to notice that looking at this slide, looking at the bar chart, they're almost identical.
Yes.
So if we look at the Quran and we look at the hadith, they're almost identical in look, not necessarily in percentage.
Yes.
So, in other words, this really confirms our theory that in order for you to understand Quran, you must understand the life of the Prophet and vice versa. So this is indicative, really, of what Muhammad's been doing, saying, and teaching, and the Quran is a reflection of all of that.
Yes. It is very coherent. It all lines up very nicely. It all fits.
Absolutely. And what's going to happen now is I am going to spin this in a different direction. We have been at least talking about the status of women in general, and we talked about their status in marriage. We talked about their rights as a wife and how the fact that the husband have the right to be not only superior over them, but also beat in them if he even have a slice of suspicion, I should say, against them. And then we talked about what happens in terms of divorce, remarriage, and the teaching that she must be remarried to another man, and then the prescribed waiting period, which in chapter 65, verse 4, we read something that is really troubling and alarming, the fact that it talks about young girls who have yet to reach their menstruation period, basically. In other words, they haven't even reached the puberty or the age of puberty. And then we looked at your statistical charts. I would like now to focus maybe on 1 or 2 specific areas that the Quran talks about when it comes to the status of women. Bill, I'm not so sure really if you knew that the Quran actually does not really have a high view of women in terms of their mockery, in terms of their trickery, in terms of their plotting ability and in terms of what they call their scheming ability.
Right.
We're looking right now at a passage found in chapter 12, verse 28. The chapter 12 called the chapter of Yusuf or Joseph, basically.
Yes.
So the name is indicative of the fact that it talks about the story of Joseph.
Yes.
In this particular passage, verse 28, it is talking about what appears to be similar to the biblical account, although it's not exactly the same. As we know from the biblical account that in Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, that Joseph was working for a master called Potiphar, and his wife basically tried to at least entice Joseph to have a sexual relationship with her. Now, the Quran took that story, of course, and added some more details to it, if you want to call them details. And it says that the woman who was trying to entice Joseph to have sexual relationship with her actually was being teased by her friends. And they were wondering, why does she want to have a relationship like this with a slave who is a servant that is working with her at her home? And she apparently, according to the teaching of the Quran and the story, invited them over.
Right.
And she wanted them to see for themselves the kind of man that he was so beautiful, that he was worthy of all of her efforts.
Yes.
And then the passage tells us that Joseph basically ran away from their attempt also to seduce him. And then the husband of this woman, apparently discovering what was going on, made a claim against not just his wife, but all of her friends. We read this in this verse. It says, so when he, meaning the husband of the woman, saw his shirt, meaning the shirt of Joseph, apparently he wanted to run away from them. They grabbed him, or she grabbed him from the back, so that got his shirt cut off or ripped, torn at the back, meaning that this proved to the husband that Joseph is innocent because he was running away and someone obviously was trying to grab him from the back. Nevertheless, he still was sent to jail, which is, I'm not so sure why the Quran is trying to get into these details anyway. And then it says that the husband says, surely it is a plot of you women, not just his wife, all of women, certainly mighty is your plot. Now, the Arabic word can also mean is your tricks or is your schemes. Now, so far, we're reading about a story that took place apparently 4,000 years ago.
Exactly.
Now, I'm not seeing anything wrong so far in a husband being upset and making such a claim, stating that you and your friends are really, basically people of a mighty scheme, okay? Do you know, Bill, that when you read the commentaries on this particular verse, actually the commentators are convinced that this label against women applies to all women at all time, the entire race.
Right.
In fact, it says that women basically are mighty in their trickery because they do it in a soft and a subtle way that they cause men to fall into trouble all the time. In fact, I looked at a number of those commentators and I wanted to basically analyze the trend. The story took place 4,000 years ago. Islam was revealed 1,400 years ago, so about 14 centuries ago. Okay? And then you look at some of the commentators like Al-Zamakhshari, 12th century. He insists that this applies to all women. Al-Razi, the 13th century. He agrees with everybody else so far.
And a highly respected scholar.
Al-Qurtubi, another highly respected scholar, 13th century. He also agrees that it applies to all women. Al-Jalalain, 14th century, another respected scholar. It applies to all women. And then we have a scholar who lives in our time, the 21st century, At-Tantawi. He also agrees that this claim about women applies to all women even today. So there has been a consistent approach in terms of interpreting this verse. My problem is this. Why do we have to label women in such a way for something that was done 4,000 years ago? Didn't Islam improve the status of women?
Good point. I never thought about this.
That's something I want really to address to a Muslim woman who's watching me. Whether you are originally a Muslim woman, born that way, or you're a convert to Islam, please help me out. I am troubled. I do not understand. Why are you being blamed for something that was done 4,000 years ago by a person that have died back then, that she attempted something that you yourself have nothing to do with it whatsoever? But of course, that's really telling of how the Prophet himself claimed that most women are going to be in hell because of what Eve have done too. So he's taking it even further.
Yes.
Now we're going to take a look at also another troubling passage. Not only the trickery of women is mighty, in fact the Quran compares it to the trickery of Satan. And it says that trickery of Satan is weak.
Yes.
Those commentators that I just mentioned, and they are just a sample, by the way, of the many commentators that you will read in that verse, always say the trickery is very mighty compared to the trickery of Satan.
They're worse than Satan.
That's exactly what it means.
They're more
Women
evil
are
than
worse than Satan. In fact, they make Satan look like a child.
Exactly.
That's what Islam teaches.
Satan could learn from a woman.
Ladies and gentlemen, does that sound to you that Islam have improved the status of women? If it did, where in this passage do we read this?
We don't.
Well, Bill, this has been really something that I have struggled with all along in trying to explain to myself, nevertheless explaining to anybody else who is a female about the status of women in Islam. I can imagine if I was a Muslim person today, what exactly would I tell my daughter, for instance, if she comes across a verse like this? That it happened 4,000 years ago, but that's not what the Sharia is teaching. That's not what the law is teaching. That's not what the Quran is teaching. That's not what the commentators are teaching.
All of this material we're talking about is carried forward into current Sharia law. This is not ancient history. This is not old stuff that's gone behind. It is active today in Sharia courts.
Absolutely. And you know, Bill, once again, we are unfortunately running out of time on this very interesting topic.
We'll do more.
And my hope that we will continue to address this very important topic, and it's really on my heart because I want Muslim women in general and convert to Islam who are female to please take a close look at these kind of teachings. Be honest with yourself and examine those references that we are providing to you, and even examine the original sources if you are able to read the Arabic language. Our hope that you will take these teachings and begin to do a quick check whether Islam have really improved your status as a human being before anything else, or specifically as a female. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for joining us today in such an important topic and joining us with our episode. Please look at the address, the website that will be shown on the screen. Send us your questions and comments and suggestions. Until then, may you have a mega blessed day.